So, you know how in October, like, Reese's or insurance companies or whatever will start making, like, Halloween-themed commercials? You know, everything looks like plastic and the people are stupid, and it feels like the people who were tasked with making the commercial probably haven't thought about Halloween since they were kids. This movie is like that, but an hour and a half long, and Reese's actually thought they were scaring people. The Strangers Chapter 1. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I had very high expectations for this movie. I really liked the last two. The first one is a more well-made movie and it's scarier, but I have more fun with the second one, so you know, there's some give and take there. But there wasn't anything about the way these were being positioned that made me necessarily excited. It was on my most anticipated of the year list, mostly out of curiosity, but once I saw that first trailer, that sort of dwindled away because it looked like an uninspired paint-by-numbers replay of the first one. Now, that's also not to say that I was going into it thinking that it was going to be terrible. What I was honestly expecting was just a middle-of-the-road slasher movie. Nothing that was going to come anywhere near being scary or effective, but also nothing that was going to make me beg for the credits to roll. And wouldn't you know it, this is, and bear in mind, I didn't see Imaginary and I didn't see Tarot or Rebel Moon 2. I haven't seen these movies. This is the worst movie I've seen so far this year. I would rather watch Night Swim because at least there were some elements in that movie that I had fun with. I don't even know where to start with this. It's worth noting that this is the first installment of 3 movies that are all supposed to be coming within the year, which has seemed like an odd release strategy to me since they announced it. So with that in mind, I had fully planned on being more lenient with this if it felt like it was all set up, because that's what the first act of a 3-act story is for. So I was going to be throwing this one a few bones for being a little light on narrative completion or payoff. But fuck that. My kindness was contingent and the requirements were not met, so let's talk about this thing. Spoiler-free thoughts first, and then I'll give a heads up and get into spoiler territory. You know the drill. Before that though, I want to thank my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. These videos take a lot of time and energy to make, and the extra support really helps to keep things moving. If you're interested in getting some bonus material and accessing private supporter-only polls or getting early access to the big videos, consider supporting me on either platform. The analogy that I made at the start of this movie is genuinely what I felt like I was watching for a vast majority of this movie. There's some setup for a while, and then it's just this painfully long back-to-back string of vapid scare scenes that lack any sense of originality or impact. Part of the thing that makes The Strangers work so well is how much time they spend setting up James and Kristen before introducing the threat, so that by the point the strangers show up, you've come to get invested in these people, and there's a really emotional layer that gets added on to the horror. Chapter 1 takes a similar structural approach, where it takes a long time before the strangers show themselves to this couple, but while I felt immersed in the tough situation Kristen and James were in, I had a really hard time buying these two as a couple, and that's not a slight against Madeline Petch or Froy Gutierrez. There are moments in this movie where both of them do a solid job working with what they were given, but it's the material they're needing to trudge through that results in almost every interaction between them feeling really plastic. Some of it was sweet, but this just doesn't feel like a couple that's been together for 5 years. But that's not the thing that really kills this movie. I actually found the two leads fairly likable, at least at the start, before they made choices. Now this might be an extension of seeing them in interviews, but I digress. The thing that makes The Strangers Chapter 1 so insufferably bad is watching it. Something that I always try to do when talking about movies is to find some points to help balance out my overall opinion. So if I love a movie, I think it's good practice to try and at least identify one thing that I don't think it does very well. And if I don't like a movie, I like to try and find something that worked. And I genuinely don't think I can talk about any one element in this movie that I liked. It's empty. There were 2 or 3 moments where something happened and it was at least slightly better than the mud world I was living in. And I'll mention those in the spoiler section, but there is not a single overall aspect that I think was successful here. I don't buy the main characters and I don't feel invested in them, so when the strangers show up to start tormenting them, I don't really care. I'm not invested emotionally, which means all I can rely on for entertainment value is vibe and or fun scare scenes with the strangers. But that's not there either. The biggest concern when the trailer dropped was that this movie looked like it was sticking way too closely to the plot of the first movie, but just a lot less suspenseful and carefully crafted, and we were spot on the money there. This follows the structure of the original to a T. It's like a child holding its mother's hand in public, which doesn't just make it feel unoriginal, but it's so close in almost every single moment of this movie that you're constantly being reminded of another movie that did every single element way more effectively. So it goes from feeling overplayed to downright frustrating. It's just plot points and scenes from the first one copied and pasted and molded with Play-Doh. They'll just grab moments and throw them in randomly into a scene without any understanding of the emotional context or tension building that made them effective before, and nothing to supplement the absence of those things. I've had my criticisms of some of the decision making in this franchise, but this movie puts even the dumbest moments in the last two to shame over and over again with some of the most infuriating decision making I've seen in a long time. These people have absolutely no survival instinct in them whatsoever. Nothing happens in this movie. This is meant to be the hook for a trilogy, and not a single thing about what they did here makes me even remotely interested in where this is going. I have absolutely no idea what they wanted me to be wondering about for the next two entries. You can't just have some characters act a little suspicious and then call it a day on setting up intrigue. You have to do more than that. They don't establish anything, there aren't any lingering questions because the things that seemed like they were hoping you'd be wondering about aren't given the attention they'd need to actually be interesting. The characters are bland and atrociously stupid, topping every bad decision made in either movie with hilarious latitude. The scares are empty and stitched together with no purpose or payoff. The strangers aren't even remotely frightening. It's visually uninteresting and uninspired. The music is bland and generic, and the ending, oh my God, the ending to this movie. This has nothing to offer. It's a boring, bland, and painfully predictable reboot that does absolutely nothing to warrant its existence or make me want to see the next two. There were multiple moments where I was either rolling my eyes or my jaw was just hanging open from how terribly executed something was, be it an attempt at a scare scene or the way a character conducted themselves. I wasn't expecting much from this movie, and it managed to be exponentially worse than I ever thought it would be. I'm going to talk a bit about some spoilers now, so if you still want to go and see it for yourself and form your own opinions untainted by spoilers, now's your warning, although you're probably going to be able to guess everything that happens anyway. So the premise is that Maya and Ryan are celebrating their 5th anniversary together, and on their way through this small backwoods town, their car breaks down and they wind up needing to stay at an AirBNB overnight while a mechanic fixes the thing up. When I say that this follows the structure of the first one, beat for beat, I really do mean it. They get to the house, spend some time together, although they're much happier this time around. Someone shows up at the door asking for Tamara, then Ryan leaves and the strangers start closing in on Maya while he's gone. Ryan returns home with a jump scare where you're meant to think it's one of the strangers at first, and then a few minutes later the onslaught begins. They continue to just copy and paste like this, but I want to touch on that one particular scene for a second. My favorite scene in The Strangers is when Kristen is attacked before James gets home. That's where I feel like the intensity of the movie comes together the most effectively, partially because it's before any of the weird and contrived decision making comes into play, but also because it's just such an immersive, tense, and horrifying sequence that ramps up so quickly and is genuinely unnerving. The mirror of that in this movie is flat out infuriating because it does absolutely nothing to create a sense of real dread and only makes Maya look like a fucking idiot. The strangers come back and are knocking at the door and they say, "Is Tamara home?" like 3 times back to back, which completely defeats the whole purpose of why they said that before. That wasn't to scare them, it was meant as a way to case the place out and get a better idea of the situation. This movie is full of that kind of thing, where it'll just throw in things from the first one without understanding why they were there or why they worked, which makes it all feel so cheap. So they're knocking at the door and she can hear them running around the house. Hell, she even hears one of them singing at the window, all creepy like. You know what she does? She lights up a joint to chill out for a bit. She's on vacation, guys. This was the first moment of the movie where I was just utterly baffled by what I was watching unfold, and there are many more moments like that. She literally comes face to face with Pinup Girl before Ryan gets home, and then she's like, "Oh, you're right. Maybe I didn't see anything. I was stoned after all." Immediately after that, they see one of the strangers standing outside of their house, and neither of them connect the fucking dots. This happens constantly, where Maya and Ryan seem absolutely oblivious and think that silence for 10 seconds means that the strangers must have left and they're safe now. Tack all of this on with the scares themselves being the most lazy, bland, and inconsequential things, and it doesn't take long for this movie to become flat out infuriating to watch. They put a jump scare noise at Maya raising a phone to her ear, by the way. I'm serious, this movie is that cheap. One more example, they try and do the guy shoots the wrong person instead of a stranger thing again here, but it's terrible. The guy this time around is the owner of the AirBNB who Maya called earlier in the night because the fridge was broken, so it's a character that we've never met before and neither of the two main characters have any emotional connection with whatsoever, so on top of just being an eye-rolling rip of a fantastic moment from the first movie, it's also missing any of the emotional context. I was having a shit time before this, but that was the moment where I fully tapped out and just wanted it to end. There's a lot floating around my head that I want to talk about, but it's just going to be me repeating over and over again how stupid and dismissive these characters are, and without footage, I think that'll be super boring. So let's just move on to how the movie ends and what I think they wanted to hook us with for the next two. So Ryan and Maya get knocked out and they wake up tied to chairs, share a moment of love as they realize that they can't really get out of this situation now, and then they're both stabbed and bleed out on the floor. Does that sound familiar? Why are we even talking about this? Why was this movie made? I will say, I thought it was sweet that Ryan took that moment to ask Maya to marry him, because that was something they talked about in one of the only other moments where I wasn't rethinking all of my life decisions. Nice idea, but yeah, no, they completely ripped the context, so no credit shall be given for this. What was a disturbing gut punch in the original is eye-rolling here because of how uninspired it feels. The final shot of the movie is Maya waking up in the hospital, and if they thought that was going to be a hook, I don't even know what to say. It seems like what they wanted us to be wondering about were the locals in this town, because they're pretty hostile towards Ryan and Maya the whole movie and act kind of suspicious, but that's it. They do absolutely nothing with it and don't sprinkle anything in that makes me want to know more about what's going on. Again, it's completely vapid. This is one of very few times where I'm genuinely struggling to find anything positive to say about it. The best I can do is there's a scene where Maya is playing the first movement of Moonlight Sonata on a piano that's out of tune, and I liked the vibe of that moment. I like Moonlight Sonata being played in a cabin. That was it. That's the best I can do. The man in the mask can be seen in a mirror sitting in a chair and watching her play, which was mildly cool, I guess, but the strangers are so empty in this movie that it didn't really leave much of an impact. Did I mention that they can teleport, by the way? Yeah, they teleport. There's no other way to explain some of these moments. They literally teleport. This movie is terrible. I have no idea what the thought process here was. The Strangers is upsetting because it's a dread-filled, chilling suspense thriller with a disturbing ending. The Strangers Chapter 1 is upsetting because it's not over yet. There are still 2 more of these things coming, and if I had little faith before, I have next to none now. I don't see how this could possibly be salvaged by more, and considering how stretched thin and unoriginal this movie was, I have no clue how they plan to make this into a compelling trilogy. Alright, well, I'll be sure to share my thoughts on the next 2 whenever those are released, but until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.